They clapped when I moved out. I'll never forget the sound of their hands slapping together like it was a performance, and I was the final act. My father stood by the front door, arms crossed, his expression half relieved, half amused. My mother leaned against the kitchen counter, nodding quietly like she'd been waiting years for this moment. And Rayan, my younger brother, whistled. Actually whistled. "Guess it's peaceful now," he joked, and they all laughed. I didn't. Not even a twitch in my lips. I just stood there, holding onto the handle of my secondhand suitcase like it was the only thing tethering me to this earth. I didn't slam the door on my way out. I let it shut slowly behind me, quietly. Because I knew something they didn't. Loud exits are for people still trying to be heard. Silent ones are for those who have nothing left to prove. It wasn't always like that. I used to believe, truly believe, that family was everything. That if I tried hard enough, loved deep enough, proved myself enough, they'd see me. They'd choose me. But I was born into a house with broken scales. Nothing I ever did measured up. I was the older sister, the dependable one, the helper, the one who just gets things done. Rayan, on the other hand, was the golden boy from the day he could speak. If he drew a crayon scribble on the wall, Mom would beam like Picasso had. Risen again. If I painted a whole canvas, she'd just ask if I'd remembered to defrost the chicken. Growing up, I learned early that invisibility wasn't just a cloak. It was a uniform. I'd wear it every morning while making school lunches, packing my brother's bag, setting the breakfast table. Sometimes I'd pretend it was a superpower. Like maybe I could pass through walls, read minds, vanish from rooms filled with people. But it wasn't magic. It was just loneliness disguised as duty. When I was 12 and Rayan was 8, he threw my favorite books into the bathtub because I'd looked at him wrong. I cried for hours. Not because of the books, but because when I told my mother, she looked at me with irritation. "You're older. Why are you being so dramatic?" she said. "Just let it go." That phrase became the soundtrack of my life. Let it go when he yelled. Let it go when he broke things. Let it go when he got into fights and I covered for him. Let it go when I won the regional science fair and nobody came to see. Let it go when he failed and still got taken out for ice cream to cheer him up. They didn't see it as favoritism. They saw it as balance. "He needs more help, Mira. You're independent. You're strong. We count on you." But what they meant was, he's the one we care to rescue. You're the one we expect to survive alone. By the time I turned 18, I was basically a third parent. My parents both worked, long hours, and it was always me who handled the small disasters. When Rayan forgot his homework, I redid it. When he got detention, I smoothed it over with teachers. I skipped outings, declined parties, even gave up. My acceptance to an out-of-state college because Rayan would fall apart without me. My dad didn't ask. He just stated it like a fact. "You can do your degree here. It's the same thing." It wasn't. I remember one night, a month before my 20th birthday. I had just finished a shift at the library, came home exhausted, and the living room was a war zone. Broken vase, screaming voices. Apparently, Rayan had borrowed my dad's car without asking and crashed it into a street sign. No one was hurt, but the damage was bad. And still, guess who they blamed? Me. "If you'd been home, you could have stopped him," my mom shouted. "What kind of example are you setting?" my dad added, pacing in frustration. I stood there, stunned, soaked from the rain, still in my dusty work uniform. I didn't say a word. There was no point. That's how things always went. I'd carry the burden. He'd walk away with a pat on the back. I thought I had gotten used to it. I had made a kind of fragile peace with my place in the family, useful, reliable, but never cherished. But it all finally cracked on my 21st birthday, the day that changed everything. I had planned something simple, nothing grand, just dinner at home. I made lasagna from scratch, my favorite, baked a chocolate cake, cleaned the whole house. I even lit candles. I thought maybe, just maybe, this time they'd remember. This time, I wouldn't have to ask for love, I'd just receive it. I waited until 7 p.m., then 8. Then 9, they walked in at 9:30, laughing, holding greasy takeout bags. Oh, you made something? My mom asked, glancing at the untouched table. Rayon didn't want to eat at home tonight. My brother dumped himself on the couch and opened his food box. Smells like garlic in here, he said, annoyed. No happy birthday. No card. Not even a look. I stood by the kitchen sink, hands trembling, eyes stinging. My father looked over and muttered, "Why are you standing there like a ghost? Either sit down or clean up." Something in me broke. Not a dramatic shatter. Just a quiet click, like the final lock on a door I didn't know I'd been waiting to close. The next morning, I packed my things. I didn't cry, I didn't argue, I didn't explain. I just wrote a note. "Thank you for raising me. I'm leaving to raise myself now." When I came downstairs, suitcase in hand, they were gathered around the breakfast table. Ryan glanced up. "What's with the luggage?" "I'm moving out." They paused, blinked. Then they clapped. I'll never forget the sound. Not because it was loud, but because it was so final, like applause at the end of a play no one enjoyed. My father chuckled. "Well, about time." Mom said nothing, just nodded, her face unreadable. Rayon leaned back, smirking. "Guess I'll finally have some peace." I didn't respond, I didn't cry, I didn't even blink. I just stepped out the front door, dragging 2 battered suitcases and 21 years of being invisible behind me. I walked down the street in silence. No car, no help, just the sound of my own feet on cracked pavement. But you know what? That silence. It was the loudest freedom I'd ever heard, and that was the day I became someone else. Not the fixer, not the doormat, not the shadow behind the star. That was the day I became Mira. Freedom, it turns out, doesn't come with trumpets. It doesn't come with fireworks or applause, not the kind that matters. It comes in the form of silence, hunger, long nights, and longer days. When I walked out that front door, I had 2 secondhand suitcases and 320 rupees to my name. I had no apartment, no job, no plan, just a burning conviction that whatever waited for me out there couldn't hurt as much as what I had endured at home. That kind of pain carves you hollow and leaves room for nothing else. I moved in with my best friend Nita for a while. Her parents weren't thrilled to have me crashing on the living room floor, but they were kind enough not to say it out loud. Every night I'd unroll the thin mattress, plug in my old phone, and stare at the ceiling fan, wondering what came next. During the day, I scoured job boards, sent out resumes, visited corner cafes and retail stores, and begged for hours at the local library. Anything that could keep me afloat. Eventually, the librarian who used to scold me for reading in the aisles recognized me and offered me a part-time shelving position. It paid peanuts, but it was something. And for the first time in my life, the money I earned was mine. I started budgeting like my life depended on it, because it did. Rent, savings, food. I skipped meals to stretch the money. I drank tap water and bought fabric scraps to stitch my own clothes. I didn't complain. I felt more alive in those struggling weeks than I ever had at home, because every tiny win was mine, earned, not handed. I still remember the first time I bought myself a cup of coffee, not out of necessity, but choice. It was from a dingy little cart near the train station. The guy handed it to me in a paper cup, and I just stood there, staring at it, tears filling my eyes. It wasn't the taste. It was the power. I had bought it. With my own money, no one else's approval, no one else's name on it. Nita watched me work myself to the bone and kept reminding me to rest. "Mira, this pace will burn you out," she warned one night as I hunched over a desk applying to universities abroad. But I couldn't stop, not now. My hands were finally on the wheel, and I wasn't going to let go. In the evenings, I worked as a freelance sketch artist online. I used to draw in secret at home because my father said art was a waste of time. "You can't eat a drawing," he'd say, ripping up a piece I was proud of. But now I was sketching blueprints, architecture studies, building models. I had always been fascinated by buildings, not because of their structure, but their silence. They held stories without ever speaking. Like me. I applied for a design scholarship in Spain. I almost didn't hit send. Who was I to dream that big? But Nita placed her hand over mine and said, They may have raised you, but you're the one building yourself now. Dream as loud as they silenced you. The night I got the email, I didn't scream. I didn't jump or cry. I just stood still, blinking at the screen. Congratulations, Mira. You've been awarded a full scholarship for our 5-year architecture program. We look forward to seeing you thrive. I stared at those words for hours. It was the first time anyone had ever looked forward to me. I left the country 3 months later, said goodbye to Nita, and promised to repay her family for every meal they gave me. I carried nothing but my passport, a carry-on bag, and a heart stitched back together with hard-earned self-worth. In Spain, I found solitude, but not loneliness. The language barrier was brutal. I'd spend hours translating course material, learning terms, practicing pronunciation. But I didn't give up. I couldn't. I was learning to build cities, and in the process, I was rebuilding myself. Over the next 2 years, my work started getting noticed. One of my urban redesign sketches made it into a global student publication. Then came a podcast invitation, then a design challenge win. Eventually, a professor offered to mentor me for international competitions. He said I had an eye for details that most people missed. I wanted to tell him that was the result of being invisible for so long. You start to notice everything. Back home, I didn't hear much. Occasionally, I'd get a text from Nita updating me on things. Your dad had surgery. Rayan failed another semester. Your mom still asks about you, sometimes. But I never replied. I had nothing to say. Until the message that changed everything. It came out of nowhere. A cold Thursday morning, as I stepped off the tram, my phone buzzed. One new message from an unknown number. Mira, we're proud of you. Your work is everywhere. Please come home. Just once. The house feels empty without you. Mom. I froze on the platform. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Proud? The word felt foreign. It didn't fit their mouths. I'd never once heard it growing up. And now, suddenly, after years of silence, proud. The timing wasn't lost on me. They hadn't said it when I worked night shifts, not when I slept on floors, not when I cried myself to sleep in a foreign country, wondering if I was enough. No. They said it when everyone else saw my worth, when my name made headlines, when my talent was undeniable. It wasn't love. It was nostalgia for the power they used to have over me. I didn't reply, but the message stayed with me, echoed through me like a song half heard, and then came the invitation, the one I hadn't expected. My university was hosting a global conference, and they wanted me to speak on behalf of the International Architecture Cohort. The event was in my hometown. They were flying us in, covering expenses, broadcasting it live on regional TV. A proud homecoming, the brochure said. I laughed when I read that. Proud? Homecoming? Still, I accepted. The day of the flight, I packed neatly, calmly. I wore my simplest clothes. I didn't want to return draped in proof of success. I wanted to return as myself. No medals, no masks. Landing back in my country was surreal. The air felt different, like time had stood still, but I had not. When the taxi pulled up outside the university hall, there were cameras, banners, people shaking hands. My name was printed across a massive digital screen. Mira Ahmed, designing tomorrow's cities today. Funny how the girl once ignored at the dinner table now drew crowds with a sketchbook. The talk went well. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't falter. I spoke of sustainable cities, community design, rebuilding from broken systems. But I wasn't just talking about concrete and steel. I was talking about people. About how we are shaped by what surrounds us, and how we, in turn, can choose to reshape the world. After the event, I stood backstage alone, soaking it in. That's when I saw them, at the back of the auditorium. Small, hesitant, my parents, and Rayan. They looked older, worn down. My mother's eyes were glassy. My father stood stiffly. Ryan had his hands buried in his pockets, avoiding eye contact. They didn't come forward. They just watched. I didn't wave. I didn't walk over. I simply turned, picked up my bag, and left through the side door. On the way to my hotel, I asked the driver to take a detour. "Where to, miss?" he asked. "My old neighborhood." When we pulled up outside my childhood home, I barely recognized it. The paint had peeled. The garden was overgrown. The windows were shut tight. But the loudest sign of change stood on the front lawn. "For sale." I stared at it for a long time. That house, once bursting with noise, demands, judgment, now stood still, like it was holding its breath. I didn't get out of the car. I didn't need to. The house was speaking. And for the first time, it had nothing to say. The hotel room was quiet, but it wasn't the suffocating kind of quiet I used to know. It was clean, intentional. I sat on the edge of the bed with the window open, letting the city's distant hum wash over me. Outside, traffic groaned and horns flared, but none of it reached me. I was in a bubble. Still. Whole. The auditorium speech had ended hours ago, but its weight lingered on my shoulders like a soft shawl. Earned, not inherited. My phone buzzed again. It was the fourth missed call from Rayan. The texts came in. Intervals. First from him. "You've changed a lot." Then from my mother. "We're proud. Come home for dinner?" Finally, my father, whose number I had deleted years ago, messaged me directly. I was wrong. About many things. I didn't respond to any of them. Not yet. Not because I was cruel, but because for the first time in my life, I had the right to choose when, where, and whether I wanted to open that door again. I thought about the last time I stood in that house. How their applause when I left wasn't congratulatory, it was celebratory. A party for the absence of a burden. Their clapping hadn't been for my courage, it had been for their relief. I remembered the sound of it, like something cracking. Open, like a wound ripping further. But what they didn't realize was that every step I took away from them was a stitch I was sewing back into myself. And now, years later, as I looked at the messages piling up on my phone, I realized the girl they clapped away was gone. The woman standing in her place was not waiting for their permission. The next morning, I did go back to the neighborhood, not out of longing, but curiosity. I wanted to see how time had treated what I left behind. The old corner shop was closed, shutters rusting. The local park was deserted. The mango tree where I used to read in secret had been chopped down. Its roots were still visible, like bones, too stubborn to decay. The street, once filled with the sound of shouting and television leaks and barking dogs, was quiet. Almost hollow. I passed a few neighbors who didn't recognize me, or pretended not to. It didn't matter. I had become a ghost in the place that raised me, and ghosts don't beg to be remembered. Then I saw her, my mother, standing outside the gate. She was thinner than I remembered, her once jet hair streaked with gray. She saw me, and her face shifted, half hope, half guilt. "Mira," she breathed, like the name itself was a prayer. I didn't smile. I didn't run into her arms like daughters do in soap operas. I stood still, measured, present. "We heard your speech," she said, voice trembling. "Your father recorded it on the TV. He watches it every night." The old me might have melted at that. But I didn't come here for nostalgia. I came for closure. "Why now?" I asked. She blinked. "What? Why are you proud now? Why didn't you clap for me when I got into art school? Why didn't you speak when I was being blamed for things Rayan did? Why now, when the world claps for me, are you suddenly ready to join in?" Tears filled her eyes. She opened her mouth, but I held up a hand. "I'm not here for apologies. I just want the truth." She looked at the ground. "We were scared," she said softly. "Scared of your freedom, of your voice. You weren't like the others. You asked questions. You didn't obey the silence. And we didn't know how to love someone we couldn't control. There it was. The truth. And it didn't soothe me. It confirmed everything I had always suspected. Love, in our house, had always been conditional. measured in obedience, calibrated by silence. I have no interest in hate, I said. But I also have no room for pretend love. She nodded, as if she understood. Maybe she did. Maybe she didn't. We stood there in that strange, stiff moment. Then she whispered, "Would you come inside? Just once?" I looked at the house. The once pristine walls now cracked, the windows dusty, the porch sagging under time. I thought of how they had clapped when I left, how they had filled that house with noise as they emptied it of me. Now, all that remained was the echo. I stepped through the gate. The house smelled the same: haldy, old wood, the faint perfume of camphor. But the energy was different. The arrogance was gone. My father sat in the living room, thinner, quieter, older. He stood when he saw me but didn't approach. Just placed a trembling hand over his chest. "Mira," he said. Not angrily, not forcefully, just softly. I was wrong. I studied him for a moment. He looked small, not physically, but emotionally, like a monument that had crumbled under its own weight. "I know," I said, and then I walked past him. I visited my old room. They had kept it locked. Inside, the walls were bare, my books, my sketches, gone. But I wasn't surprised. I didn't feel loss. That version of me, the girl who cried into her pillow, who begged to be heard, who tried to earn scraps of affection, she was gone. And in her place stood a woman who had learned to clap for herself. That evening, I left without staying for dinner. My mother tried to convince me. "It's your favorite chicken curry with extra coriander." "I'm not hungry," I said. "Not for food and not for memories." As I reached the gate, I turned back. "You know," I said slowly, "when I left this house, you clapped, as if I'd done something shameful. But I want you to remember this. It wasn't me who emptied this house. It was you, with your silence, your favoritism, your pride. You broke something you can't rebuild. Not with curry, not with messages, not even with guilt." They didn't stop me this time. No one clapped, only the wind moved. As I walked down the street past the ghost of my childhood, I didn't feel pain. I felt clarity, power, freedom. And for the first time, I realized something. Forgiveness isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet decision to move forward without dragging the past behind you. I flew back to Spain the next day. The world kept turning. I graduated. I started my own firm. I mentored girls who had been silenced, who were told they were too much or too loud or too ambitious. I taught them how to build, not just buildings, but lives. I didn't tell them to forgive everyone. I told them to forgive themselves for ever thinking they were unworthy. Years later, I received a letter from Rayan. It was short. Just 6 words. I finally heard the echo too. I smiled. Maybe he had learned. Maybe they all had. But their learning wasn't my burden. I had already passed my test, and I didn't need their applause anymore.